Simahamanza. Today we're going to translate the ancient Sumerian joke that I have written down on this gigantic tablet with this fancy modern stylus. If you would like to know how it is pronounced, well, it depends on whom you ask. We do not have audio recordings from the old Babylonian period after all, but I would read it as 𝒃𒗾𒄾💨💦💨💦 Now, when I first learned about this joke, it came with an English translation. There was something like, having entered the tavern, the dog didn't see a thing. He asked, should I open this one? Turns out, the real meaning of the joke might be slightly different and even make more sense. In my last video I explained why, but now let's translate this joke together, step by step. The first character here, this one. That's ur.
It can be used as a word sign, in which case the word is reconstructed as ur and means predator or something. It can be used for dogs, but also for lions, so it's not really specific. And also you might have noticed that I am using an entirely different device now in order to record my audio. So I have to talk about the sponsor of this video.
This video was sponsored by me.
So, back to the topic. This word here is very generic, but now it's used as a part of a compound word together with this other sign over here. This one can be read several ways, but in this particular case, it is used as a word sign. The assigned reading is 𝒌🂨𒂠�15. It is an adjective with a very general meaning that ranges from native or local to common or domestic. Also has the meaning noble for some reason. There are a bunch of other readings for this character, and we'll get to at least two of them when we reach the next word, but now it's 𝒌🂨. You might notice that I write G-I-R as gir, but I pronounce something like kir. Not exactly, and we'll get to that. Most importantly though, most scholars agree that Sumerian didn't have, or at least not before its consonant inventory was influenced by Akkadian g, b, and d sounds. The sounds that are transcribed this way are thought to have been p, t, and k. Now, the sounds that are transcribed with these letters, P, T, and K, are thought to have been aspirated, so they were pronounced as P, T, and K. This was the phonological part of the reconstruction. Now, since most of my content has spoken Sumerian, and I don't want my native language to define my Sumerian pronunciation, the reconstruction I use has to go as far as phonetic, as speculative as it has to be, because there really aren't defaults in many situations when it comes to articulation. Whenever we activate our fleshy parts to push air out of them, or maybe suck in some air, we do it some way or another, and just because that particular way feels natural to us doesn't make it more default than the alternatives. In this case, the problem is that k and e are fundamentally incompatible sounds because they require very different tongue postures. For this reason, no matter what your language is, you never pronounce an actual k and an actual e together. But different languages have different opinions about how to make this combination work. Some languages leave k as it is and adjust the articulation of e. In such a language, this word would sound something like kir or kr or something like that. Or if that was my native language and I let it define my Sumerian pronunciation, I would do it here as well. Instead, my native language does something else, where both sounds differ a bit from how they would be pronounced in isolation, and that is also what most versions of English do, so in that case it would be kir, with a slightly palatalized k and a slightly retracted I. I think, on the other hand, that how Sumerian is written makes most sense if I assume that Sumerian is one of those languages that preserve the degree of palatal quality of I as much as possible and palatalize K even further to make the two sounds work together, resulting in something like kir. This is because written Sumerian shows that vowels' effects on the environment is particularly strong. In fact, it seems like stressed vowels turn other vowels into themselves sometimes. For example, there is an affix construction that is supposed to be muni because it is a mu and a ni put together, but in fact it is mostly written as mini, which makes more sense to me if this ni is actually a strongly palatal ni and the entire construction is something like mni, and in such a language I would expect this to be kir. I think it is obvious from how the explanation itself is worded, but I want to make it clear that this is my idea, not some scientific consensus. And if some of you think that I am too comfortable with using these reasonings, no, I'm not. Spoken Sumerian in 2025 is always a semi-constructed language. You can't do anything about it, and it is from everyone. You can be conscious about it, you can be unconscious about it, you can be honest about it, you can be dishonest. But at the end of the day, any time you utter something in Sumerian, even just a single word, you've made up a huge part of it. Or if you haven't, someone else have, and you followed. And there is nothing wrong about this. I want to do it consciously and systematically. Why? Mental health issues. But otherwise, throughout the entire video, I'm going to talk about things that are mostly accepted by most scholars. I'm going to talk about things that are less accepted, and some ideas are specifically mine. I'm going to be clear about this, so you are going to know what to take with a grain of salt. Now, urkir, with the stress at the end, means dog. Literally, domesticated predator, but practically it's just dog.
Now, this third character here, this is re. Oh, it could be read as ri too, but we know that in this particular case, these three signs together have to be some declinated form of the word urkir. And there is no such thing as urkiri, so we can narrow it down to urkire. Don't worry about the double r, because I am aware that if we take this at face value, it looks like urkire. But this is just the way how scribes used to write the suffixes beginning with a vowel after stems ending in a consonant that were written with kanjis. Basically, this thing here, this is not written phonetically. Okay, this is written with a word sign. The phonetic part starts with re, and the r is there because the syllable starts with the r. It is just how urkire is written. Okay, it's just one single ra in this case. Okay, now let's learn a little bit.
This is the so-called ergative case. If your own language is an ergative language, then well, you got lucky. You have something exactly like this. If you have studied those languages, you also know what we are dealing with here. Otherwise, well, this is the form a subject has if the verb it belongs to also has an object.
Depending on how you translate the entire sentence, this form can correspond to by the dog in English, as in by the dog something is done or isn't done. But generally we just translate this as a nominative. But in this case, keep in mind that the verb, a noun in this form, belongs to, does have an object. Remember that.
And here, this word ends. And there are no spaces in Sumerian orthography. There are commas though. The line breaks in full-line texts and the cell breaks in cell texts function as commas. And that's why forced line breaks, where the scribe reaches the end of the tablet but doesn't want to put a comma yet, are wrapped without a new line.
Now, the next word is what I pronounce as 𝒃𒃗𒅆𒉡𒂠𒁹. She is a suffix. It means to. Its meaning is turned into together with the verb over here, because this in here means in. And if this is understood together with this she over here, they will add up to into.
𝒃𒃗 is a noun that means tavern. So 𒃃𒃗𒅆 means to the tavern, which is going to end up meaning into the tavern once we reach the verb. Before we do that, we have these two occurrences of this one character with two distinct readings, none of them being kish. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I like to compare the way how Sumerian writing system works to Japanese, where you have the more or less phonetic writing systems katakana and hiragana together with the logographic kanji, and for each kanji you mostly have more than one readings, at least one onyomi and at least one kunyomi. I'm not saying it's the same, especially because here the phonetic characters are not a separate set, but just a subset of the otherwise logographic system, each having at least one logographic reading, mostly more, and at least one phonetic reading, mostly more. Also, each phonetic reading might be ambiguous. For example, the vowel might be underspecified, or the consonant might be underspecified. You can take this behavior as even more readings. It's crazy, but the core concept exists elsewhere too. Once logographic writing occurs, something like this happens. And it does, to some degree. In English, for example, numbers can be written phonetically, but also logographically. And in this case, how many readings does this character have? It can be read as 1. Right? But if this reads as 10, then what is this? And what is this? Or what is this? Now, st is written phonetically. But now, what does this stand for? If you were a linguist reconstructing English 5,000 years later in the future, you would probably say that this glyph has a reading 1 and a reading 4. And this glyph has the readings 2 and seka, right? And this one has the readings 3 and th. You see where this is going, don't you? In an extremely specific scientific description, everything gets insanely complicated very fast, even simple things. But once you have built up an intuitive understanding of the language, it gets easier because now you can feel to some degree what's going on. Translating ancient texts is still very hard, of course, but this specific part here looks more chaotic than it actually is. I also have to explain something else here, because I keep reminding that my vowels are speculative, but I never actually explain how they are speculative and that to what extent. It has nothing to do with the translation itself, but it's a good opportunity to explain what I am talking about when I mention my vowels being speculative. If your native language makes a similar distinction, or if you have studied languages that do, you certainly noticed that my final e in 𝒃𒗺𒅆𒉡� is different from my a in 𝒃𒗾𒅆💄🅪. Even though they are romanized the same way, I pronounce them differently. Now, it's because standard Sumerology works with 4 vowel graphemes: a, e, I, and u. The main reason for this is that these are the 4 vowel qualities that are more or less consistently registered by the writing system. Less consistently, as you have seen in the case of 𝒃🗾, but generally we can distinguish some labial, that is rounded vowel quality, that is represented by the Latin letter U nowadays, some low quality, that is represented by the Latin letter A, and some front vowel quality, that is represented by either the letter E or I, depending on what the scholar thinks about it, with varying certainty. Now, while some scholars think this is an accurate representation of the Sumerian vowel inventory, some think that it's either the writing system that sucks at being a writing system, or we suck at interpreting it, or some combination of both, but Sumerian had more vowel phonemes, which seems reasonable. You see, with just these 4, there are many Sumerian words that are written differently, mean different things, but seem to be pronounced the same. Although most of these scholars don't think it is realistic to reconstruct the full set of Sumerian vowel phonemes. Some try. Some ideas are absolutely unhinged, with insane numbers of vowels and arguments behind them that are beyond speculative. There are a few realistic ones though, and my favorite is definitely this one. I'm not going to summarize it. If you're interested, read it, but it's based on structural analysis and cross-linguistic comparisons. Very good. In fact, it might be even better than the author had thought. In practice, it means this. Basically Italian. I, E, A, U, O, O, A. Italian orthography sucks, so we don't really know about this unless we speak the language, which I don't, or study its phonology, which I did. In particular, we can't distinguish these 2 vowels and these 2 vowels. This means that these 2 high degrees are written the same way. We have to learn for each word how it is pronounced. Now, the idea is that Sumerian writing system sucks 1 degree more, and even this difference is hidden by the writing system. Actually, it's just half a degree, because for the front vowels, it is mostly decodable. And there are things that support this, but none of them are conclusive. Interestingly, in the Hellenistic period, there actually are writings with Greek letters that do indeed prove that there was a distinction between long O and long U, but only for Akkadian and only for that period and only for the long vowels. The short ones, these short rounded vowels, are mostly written as O, like with the letter omicron, indiscriminately, basically the same way as they are written as U indiscriminately in Latin letters in modern Assyriology. But for the long vowels, we have omega and omicron upsilon relatively consistently. I only mention this because there are some, although less consistent, signs of the same thing for Sumerian from the same period, but I don't genuinely believe that it proves anything about this. I don't believe that the original Sumerian vowel inventory survived into that period in any consistent form. I think this is eventually the reality in Sumerian due to Akkadian influence, and those late long vowels are also most likely the result of that Akkadian influence. Anything richer than this must be earlier than this. If you're interested about the ideas, I recommend this paper. For me, the determining factor is that Sumerian spoken with this vowel inventory sounds absolutely amazing. But I'm also a linguist, so I understand the consequences of choosing this one. Let me explain. This particular morpheme here is reconstructed as 𝒌 in this system for obvious reasons. When this is attached to a verb, it is 𝒌. Well, if you know German, Hungarian, some Slavic languages, or maybe Latin, you understand why some nominal pre- or postpositional element that refers to a direction would be attached to a verb. What happens in Sumerian is basically that, but on steroids. Practically, the entirety of Sumerology agrees that this is the original form of the morpheme, and this one is a result of a merger between 𝒊 and 𝒊 in certain environments. With this inventory, on the other hand, 𝒊 cannot merge with 𝒊. You see, it is impossible for a phoneme to merge with a second one if there's a third one between them in the phonological space. Generally, a phoneme is unable to jump over another one. No phoneme can change past a neighboring one. A merger can only happen between neighboring phonemes. This means that my choice of vowel inventory practically determines that this morpheme has to be 𝒌. And my choice of vowel over here is some speculative decision partially based on this one. It requires many steps and it's not really relevant. You already got the idea. So these double dots over these vowels here, these are just my thing, okay? You can just ignore those.
We arrived to the verb. How fun! What is written here is 𝒃𒾊🅨. Ma is something we can reserve for desert. The interesting thing here is this 𝒃🾊, or what looks like 𝒃🾊, because we are too smart to believe it is 𝒃🾊. Do you really think I am so stupid I wouldn't recognize the illative ambifix? Of course I do. This is not 𝒃🾊. This is 𝒃🾊.
I'll explain. 𝒃🾊 means to enter. 𝒃 means in. Put together this way, it means enter in or in enter or whatever, which seems a bit redundant, but that's it, okay? If we read this word as 𝒃🾊, it would mean something entirely different, because in doesn't mean in. It means by him or he. It's actually it works the ergative way, so it's the same kind of thing inside the verbal chain as the noun in the ergative case outside of the verbal chain. Okay, this way 𝒃🾊 means brought in by him, or he has brought it in, or something along the line. But we are very clever, we are very good at Sumerian. We know that 𝒃🾊 in the vast majority of the cases does have some directional indicator. In this function, mostly this is 𝒃, which when combined with in becomes 𝒃. And this is because the basic form of 𝒃 is actually 𝒃, and the basic form of in is actually 𝒃. They only take these forms when alone. 𝒃 only takes the form in when it's alone. 𝒃 only takes the form in when alone. Together they just combine nicely into this beautiful thing here. Since this doesn't look like 𝒃🾊 at all, we can deduce that no is involved in the story. It is just 𝒃🾊 with the vowel length disregarded, which is very typical for Sumerian. We know the vowel length here because sometimes it isn't disregarded, but typically it is. With such a so-called plain spelling, it would have been written with the traditional character for an extra unit of E, which is this. Yeah. That would absolutely defeat the reason of doing so, because it can be read as 𝒉𒂗🅊. There is a less traditional way to do the same with the E1 character. I write inconsistently like this, except when I forgot not to write it like this, which I do. But this character is not a frequently used tool of plain spelling in ancient Mesopotamia. It does exist, but this is the norm. Yeah, actually, the norm is to ignore the vowel length, but if you don't, this is the norm. Now, ma is just some way to connect two sentences. It can be translated as and. For my Frankenstein language intuition, it feels more like the Turkish ip, up, up morpheme, despite the fact that this one is attached to a fully conjugated verb. So that's why I translate the line as having entered the tavern. 𝒃💃🅊 is not the subject of this sentence. Because look, 𝒃💃🅊 is in the ergative case. And 𝒃💃🅊 doesn't have an object. It just says someone went in somewhere. The verb 𝒃💃🅊 directly belongs to does have an object. So from here to here, the sentence is the dog having entered the tavern.
And now let's get to the second line. This is going to be very fast from now on. This character here is ņin, which means thing. Ito majd beleszvágva 𝒃💃🅊💃💃🅏. Na, me is song or any. I'm gonna spoiler it because we would normally learn this once the verb is reached, but it's also a declinated form, which is hidden by the lack of plain spelling. It's name actually, but the vowel length is ignored, so it's not name, it's name, which can mean by some or by any, but for an inanimate noun it can also mean unto some, to some, or for some. And the same for any, unto any, to any, for any. Thing is definitely an inanimate noun, so it's gonna be unto anything, or to anything, or for anything. 𝒃💃 is I. It actually belongs to a phrasal verb here that together means to see. Practically it is to eye on something, where it's not entirely clear what is, but you get the idea. If you see something, it is expressed in Sumerian as you are in eye on something. The verbal part is here. I read it as tosh. The reason for the sh at the end of the word, despite the fact that what's here is just the do-ate character, is that at least some versions of the verb, some versions and forms of the verb actually do contain r when a vowel follows, which would not be an unusual behavior for word final consonant in Sumerian to be disregarded at the end of the word, but to be written when it's not at the end of the word. And actually EPSD gives two variations of this verb, one as tuch and one as tush. I go with this second one. My choice of vowel is o,
because the Akkadian usages of the sign include the emphatic pronunciation tu. Yes, I am aware that it's not tu or something like that, as it is in some modern Semitic languages, but it's still not the same as tu. And if they pronounced these adjective consonants with a delay between the release of the stop and the release of the glottal closure, it's less different. Of course, but if there was no delay, the difference is significant. It can be a creaky voice or something.
Why are you talking like that?
Why are you talking like that?
Like how adjectives behave in Georgian. I'm not the first person to use Akkadian emphatic values to find Sumerian O's. It's not conclusive, but of course once I have chosen this vowel inventory, I always have to decide how to pronounce something. It can be criticized, but that's it. My pronunciation of the r at the end is less speculative. There are some signs of the Sumerian r and Akkadian too having such an allophone. One of them being those Greek writings I've already mentioned. Those have interesting cases, like the name Ziusudra, that is written as Xisutros. Now, the Sumerian name contains the phoneme t, and one would expect tr to be written as tr in Greek too, with the tau. But it's written with the theta, that stands for the aspirated t in ancient Greek, not for the th, as it does in modern Greek. Fortunately, English also has aspirated t, so I can show you what I'm talking about. Words like tree, train, pronoun, etc. You can hear that the aspiration of the aspirated consonant penetrates the following sound, turning its voicing effectively off. Now, Sumerian t would necessarily do the same as English t and of course Greek t, but if Sumerian t does it, it's some extra process that's not expected to happen. So we expect tr, but we don't expect tr. If tr is actually tr, and based on the Greek spelling it is, I understand this as Sumerian having a voiceless allophone of r, like Turkish and some Slavic languages, and others too, that's active in voiceless environment. I think an end of an utterance is such an environment, like Turkish does it, so I apply this phenomenon here.
Now, nu means nd, because it's an affix, and English nd is an affix too. If I said nu means not, I would lie, because not is a semi-independent word. Because not is a semi-independent word. Majd eldöntöm, hogy melyiket fogom használni. Mu is what we call a ventive affix. It theoretically refers to some kind of here-ness or either direction, but I don't think we have to care about it this time. And this it is simply here to write a mun syllable together with the previous mu, and this na, we've already talked about it. So the translation for numuntos, song, which is not English actually. You might be more satisfied with he didn't see. What didn't he see? Anything. He didn't see anything. So at this point we have the dog having entered the tavern. Didn't see anything. So the easy part is done. If you need a coffee, now's the time to pause the video and have one. If you're back, or if you didn't even go anywhere, let the fun begin!
So here's the last line. The main point of this video is specifically the first two characters. In my previous video, I explained the well-known translation for this joke is based on the idea that these two characters together, read as nan, mean this or this one, and based on that, the dog wants to open this one as something he refers to as this one. But based on Jagersma's new observations, it's more likely that this one is just this first character here, read as ne in this particular case. Otherwise, this character has many readings. It's quite funny. It's a nightmare character, by the way, but in this case, it is ne, and it means this one or this. And if we add the second character into the picture, the entire construction is nan, which means one like this, like such a thing. And so seemingly what changes in the translation would be just one like this instead of this one. So the dog wants to open one like this from now on and not this one as we previously believed. But there are other things too in this particular line. I never stopped to think about this before, but now I did. Because look, these two final characters, e and she, these two characters together form a particle that, if attached to the end of the sentence, turn the sentence into a quote. This is a direct quote. So this eshe means that whatever is before is a quote from someone. So this particular line is a quote from the dog. Okay, so we have the first two lines from the narrator. The dog, having entered the tavern, didn't see a thing. And then we have a quote from the dog that the dog says inside the tavern when he doesn't see anything. What's interesting here is the grammatical difference between the first two lines and this one here. Because look, this first word, nan, this should be in a specific grammatical case. I mean, if this is a grammatically precisely formed Sumerian sentence with the textbook grammar, it should be ne, which means onto, one like this. And this is because these next two characters are ngal taka. And ngal taka means to open, but not grammatically. Grammatically, it means to taka ngal on something. And so for this verb, whatever someone opens has to be in the directive case. And not just that, because that form here, this single taka character here, would be, based on the textbook grammar, what some people call a perfective form, some call it the past tense, some call it the hamtu. I call it the hamtu because this is less of a lie than the other two are. But basically, this wouldn't fit here. I mean, the hamtu form wouldn't fit here because in the hamtu, whoever does the doing comes before the stem in a specific form. The same way we have seen in the case of numuntur, where this marks the subject, the person who sees something, numuntur. But here we can see a verbal affix that refers to a subject, but this is a suffix. This is n here, and that wouldn't fit a hamtu form. This has to be maru, the other form. So that's what some people call present future form. Some people call it the imperfective form. I would maybe call it a progressive. Sometimes I do, but regularly I just call it the maru. And well, this is what happens in the maru. It can be I'm gonna open something, or I am opening something, or it can be you're gonna open something, or you are opening something. But the problem with this, in a textbook maru form, the taka stem should be reduplicated. We should see this, and some people think it should be pronounced as taka. Others think it should be pronounced as tata. I go with tata, but this is not particularly relevant here, but what is relevant that it is not reduplicated. We can see just taka followed by a personal suffix that shows it is maru, but formally it doesn't look like a maru, and it's an indicative form. And in the indicative, verbs normally have something before the stem. So even though it is maru, and as such, the subject is expressed by suffixes, prefixes would still be used. In this particular case, ngal is the thing that is takad onto nan. There should be a prefix, actually an ambifix, but now it's used as a prefix. There should be a prefix that refers to ngal, which would be, in this particular case, ip. So what I would say, if I wanted to say, I'm gonna open one like this, would be nenengaliptatan. Or even more likely, nenengalpiptatan. So definitely not nenengaltakaen or nenengaltaken, what's written here. And even if one omits the p for some reason, Sumerian indicative verbs still require some prefixed morpheme, at least an i or maybe an a, but something. Sumerian indicative verbs without prefixed morphemes do exist, but this is specific to the Old Babylonian period, and even then it is extremely rare. I wasn't able to find anything about these, like any ideas whether we are supposed to read them as they are written, or these are just defective writings. I don't know, do exist, very rare. But this particular line is extra defective because we can't even find the terminative marker. It seems to be disregarded entirely. And also this first or second person, of course, from the context we know it is first person, but otherwise first or second person marker, this suffix here, this n, this is written as n. But after vowels, I would expect it to contract with the previous vowels. I would expect it to be written as takan. Maybe I would actually expect it to be written as iptatan or piptatan, but you get the point. Normally, I wouldn't stop to think about this because it does happen that instead of the contracted form, the basic n form is used. It does happen, but here, this particular line is very strange, so I had to decide. Is it my Sumerian that's not good enough to deal with this sentence? Or the sentence's Sumerian is not good enough? I excluded the impossible and I decided that I'm gonna work with what remains. Of course I can't be sure, but I suspect that the difference between the grammar of the first two lines and the third one is deliberate. The language usage here is supposed to contribute to the punchline in some way or another. I have no idea what it was. I can't determine whether it is supposed to be some broken Sumerian or incorrect grammar that is a result of poor language learning skills from some Akkadian guy, or is it some low register street Sumerian, some vernacular form, maybe some low class speech? I don't know. And I don't even have any idea about that. But I strongly believe that the language the dog uses is deliberately different from the language the narrator uses to talk to us. And the dog's language is not a particularly standard or textbook Sumerian. The frequently used modern broken English in cat memes naturally came to my mind, but I don't think it has anything to do with this joke. Maybe it's the same thing, but I don't believe so. But I do believe that it is part of the joke. And so my contribution to how we understand this joke wouldn't just be the insertion of 𝒌💾💾💃's new observation about the determinatives into the translation, but also the specific style of the last line, how it is written.
So, based on all these, my translation of this joke will be something like, having entered the tavern, the dog doesn't see a thing. He's like, I'm gonna open one like this. Well, that about does it for today. Thank you for listening, if indeed you still are, and you're all dismissed. Goodbye.
I would also like to give a special thank you to the 𝒉𒂗𒅅𒋁💏, from whom I have shamelessly stolen the thumbnail design. Thank you.